Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the food dialogues. Now, during the COVID pandemic, civil society organizations, the private sector, Western Cape government, and municipalities successfully collaborated to address the immediate food crisis generated by the pandemic. Today, I want to discuss ways in which we can build on this mobilization to put food system change more firmly on the political and institutional agenda. The new relationships built in action are a potential window of opportunity to transition from food aid, which is not sustainable, to food security. But on a more cautionary note, many institutional barriers remain, and the window of opportunity for food system change, in my view, is relatively small. So we have to get moving. Now, we know that prior to the COVID pandemic, many people weren't food secure. The poorly functioning food system in Cape Town and in our country as a whole has been well documented, well researched. And despite a lot of this excellent food system research and policy advocacy and many discussions and different public sector initiatives over the years, there's been no serious, in my view, collective commitment to a transformed food system that is both nutritious and affordable and serves the needs of all citizens. And while some frameworks and policies have been put in place, there has tended to be a lack of effective implementation. And as a consequence of this, there's been a continued reliance by the poor on both the state and NGO food aid year after year. And this is not sustainable. Now, during the pandemic, general food insecurity has been heightened for at least three reasons, probably more. One has been the very negative impact of the lockdown and the subsequent economic contraction. And here the existing poor, of course, have been the hardest hit. The unemployed, informal traders, spaza shop owners, small-scale farmers, and fishers. And in addition, as Oxfam has pointed out globally, many that were previously surviving have been tipped over the edge through loss of jobs and closure of businesses. Second problem has been a failure to feed by national government. Important recent research by Professor Jeremy Seekings shows the shocking fact that far less people were fed by national government during the pandemic than before. This is a problem because food security is first and foremost a national government mandate. And thirdly has been the unequal burden of disease. There's a direct connection between poor nutrition and worse COVID-19 outcomes, with the poor again bearing the brunt of infections and fatalities, which has further disrupted food security in the pandemic hotspots. On the positive side, during the last 4 months, communities have responded to the pandemic by mobilizing, organizing, educating, and networking. In my view, this is possibly the biggest revival of civic activism in South Africa since the 1980s. Communities have been assisted by a wide variety of NGOs, faith-based organizations, non-profits, as well as the private sector, big and small, and philanthropic organizations. New forms of organizing have emerged, for example, through the more than 170 community action networks in Cape Town, which have acted locally, but have connected across historical boundaries or islands through Cape Town Together movement. CANS and Cape Town Together more broadly have organized themselves, in their words, on the basis of doing, sharing, and storytelling. They have emphasized the power of building relationships, non-partisan politics, and adaptive leadership, where you take action, and while you're taking action, you reflect, learn, adapt and adjust, and then repeat. In particular, we need to appreciate and understand the role played by hundreds of community kitchens that have sprung up in poor and vulnerable neighborhoods. This slide shows the dense network of 30 community kitchens in a community called Vrygrond near Muizenberg in Cape Town. And it also shows on the right the powerful relationships and partnerships that have developed around food flows between what we can call intermediary organizations that acted to raise the necessary resources and grassroots structures at the front line of distribution. In my view, actions taken by civil society during the crisis effectively saved the day, meeting at least 50%, if not more, of community food needs. Data shows that up until the 5th of June, 74 days into lockdown, civil society organizations collectively provided over 3.1 million meals in the form of parcels, hampers, hot meals, sandwiches, food vouchers. And just to note that this figure is probably an undercount. And we can usefully disaggregate civil society organizations in food distribution into 3 categories. We get the traditional large food aid NPOs. We have the hundreds, if not thousands, of decentralized grassroots structures taking many different forms, and then connecting them the intermediary food supply organizations and resource networks. And humanitarian aid, in my experience, was most effectively delivered when these 3 levels of NGOs were able to work well together. Subnational government also played a big role. The Western Cape government led a massive humanitarian relief effort, committing over 80 million rand from their budget and delivering 50,000 food parcels to households via NGOs. They were the only provincial government in South Africa to keep the school feeding programs operating, which made a huge difference. And just to note that in the early stages of the lockdown, the Solidarity Fund also made a significant contribution, delivering in the Western Cape about 32,000 parcels via NGOs. The need for a collaborative approach to food aid during the crisis was recognized early on. The Food Coordination Forum was based on a whole of society approach, which starts with the recognition that government on its own can't deal with complex issues, and it needs partners to share risks and rewards and promote mutual accountability. The forum was convened by the EDP, the Economic Development Partnership, as a neutral intermediary. Our job, as in this example, is to help diverse organizations from different sectors work together to find common solutions. 4 outcomes and lessons from the Food Forum process are worth mentioning. Firstly, partnering works best when focused on joint action. In other words, don't try and deal with too many issues at the same time. Secondly, internal partnerships within the public sector institutions are absolutely necessary to help departments see the wider system and work beyond their individual mandates. And this is, in my experience, not easy. Thirdly, the COVID-19 crisis has generally heightened awareness of the inadequacies of existing food and nutrition systems in our city and in our country, and we can build on this. And fourthly, there is perhaps a newfound respect within the public sector for the flexibility, responsiveness, and sheer grit and determination of civil society. There are opportunities to promote further collaboration between civil society organizations and the public sector on the basis of this. This brings me to the current moment. The crisis is still with us. Notwithstanding the massive effort by different actors and partners to date, the immediate food crisis continues. NGO members of the Food Forum recently reported that 89% of them are experiencing increased food needs, while 70% of NGOs face declining resources through donor and volunteer fatigue and many other challenges. And this comes at a time when the public sector is facing massive fiscal challenges and is unlikely to significantly fund further emergency food programs. It is clear that hunger is also negatively impacting on efforts to promote behavior change necessary to reduce transmissions. At this moment, other than the SASSA special COVID grant of 350 Rand, which has been unfortunately very slow in materializing, civil society continues to feed thousands of people every day. If for whatever reason NGO food schemes decline or cease operation, the slow violence of food insecurity will quickly tip over into widespread hunger. This is a risk to any local or regional recovery program. Given these circumstances, how do we transition from food aid, which is not sustainable, to food security? My colleague Ralph Hamann recently put it well in an article in the Daily Maverick. And I quote, "For some, even thinking about the longer term seems like a luxury, given the need to meet unrelenting day-to-day needs. Others emphasize the need to go beyond such immediate crisis relief to develop more systemic, longer-term interventions. The challenge is, how can we better connect daily struggles for survival to systems change? How do we hold the tension between short-term action and longer-term visioning, policy formulation, and alliance building within and between institutions?" There is space to build a collaborative approach, harnessing the energy and relationships generated by the crisis. But just a few notes of caution. Food system frameworks are analytically correct, but politically and institutionally complicated to work with. There are usually just too many moving parts, cutting across too many different mandates, functions, and budgets. So organizing the required transversal, intergovernmental, cross-boundary, and cross-sector partnerships on the basis of a common agenda to achieve joint action is not for the faint-hearted. It takes time and effort and resources. And in my view, this process is unlikely to happen if left up to government on its own. Agency, the concept of agency, where individuals or groups engage in policy processes that shape food systems, has largely been absent in the past. How do we ensure that the voices of civil society, together with informal retailers and traders, small farmers, fishers, and others, are heard? Again, this takes time and effort. In our experience with systems change work, the main challenge lies with a public sector institutional culture that typically drives a short-term fragmented response, department by department, project by project. And given the compliance nature of the South African public sector monitoring and evaluation system, institutions are typically reluctant to act beyond their mandates, particularly in times of budget cuts and the threat of unfunded mandates. Historically, there are weak relationships of trust between the top-down authorizing environment of government and the bottom-up mobilizing environment of civil society. Any food system theory of change needs to address these specific challenges very seriously. In conclusion, as we experienced with the Cape Town water crisis previously, the opportunities for change driven by community mobilization during the drought reverted to business as usual very quickly. We need to use the current window of opportunity to firstly keep the focus on food security, 2, build a common agenda for change between different sectors through a collaborative approach, and 3, build on emergent partnerships with communities or within communities, fledgling social solidarity between race and class, new networks within the food chain, and newfound civil society government relationships. Thank you very much for inviting me to share these thoughts and reflections. I believe that these food dialogues are an important opportunity to mobilize support for the processes and partnerships necessary to drive food system change in our city, our region, and our country. Thank you very much.